Retail is harder than ever. The margins are so thin. Every year there's some sort of crisis, and I would not be doing it if I didn't love it. We had this incident last year where our primary lender, was going out of business and went out of business, and it was the scariest 3 months. Long story short, I had to go raise $3 million within 2 weeks. I love clothing. I love touching fabric. I love the transformative aspect of it. I love seeing customers put on a dress and look at themselves with a whole new perspective. It's magical. COVID was probably, of all the things that threatened our business, the biggest one. We were a business whose customers mainly went to the office Monday through Friday, and overnight they stopped going. It was horrible. It was horrible.
A fundamental component I've found again and again in businesses is if you get joy in helping your customers, that goes a long way because it's the engine of the business, but it's also really the essence of what makes good things happen. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Paul, it's an absolute pleasure. I've been really looking forward to today. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So, I thought we'd start maybe towards the beginning. As we did our research for this podcast, your story is extraordinary because your background, where you came from, and the fact that you started in consulting and then ended up in the business you're in. Talk a little bit about how you a moment on how you grew up and sort of those influences, and then how, your consulting career, and then how you ended up deciding to do this.
My dad is American, my mom's Japanese, and my dad worked for the State Department, the US State Department. He was a diplomat. And so that dictated a lot of where we grew up, and my sister and I was born in France, spent most of my childhood in Japan, but I spent a few years also in Washington, D.C. My dad was then posted in Taipei, ultimately in Kuala Lumpur. So, I would say we had like a fairly, not U.S.-centric, international upbringing growing up, and especially with my mom being Japanese. And, I very much consider myself to be equally American and equally Japanese. I think that's like pretty, I think, fundamental. If I reflect on me and my personality, I think that is really a key part of what makes me me. My mom is a businesswoman. Used to work in high-end fashion, and then actually ended up starting her own company as an entrepreneur. And I never growing up thought like, oh my gosh, like when I grow up, that's what I want to be, because it was anything but glamorous. Like she literally, started her company in our basement when we were living in Washington, D.C. And I saw the FedEx boxes, always like lined up at our door. And I think from just having seen it up close and personal, it was not something that I thought to myself like, oh my gosh, like I thought it was like, it seemed really fun and interesting, but I didn't look at it and think like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. And if anything, I really was leaning more towards what was my dad's career. I wanted to go work in international development. And so, I spent even when I was in high school, I had like a short stint volunteering at an orphanage in Thailand. I ended up working in a refugee camp in Zambia. And then ultimately, like even after college, spent time working in South Africa. And I just kind of always thought like that's where my career would take me. So to now just kind of see it all play out and actually realize like, oh, I am much more my mother's daughter than I thought is interesting.
That's really interesting. And, but you went into consulting. You decided to work at Bain. Is that right? I think you were at Bain.
Yes, I of course I decided, but I have to say, I think this is where it didn't really feel like, okay, when I grow up, what I want to be was a management consultant. I came back, I think so the summer before senior year of college, which is when, if you go to one of these competitive universities. Like all the recruiters are lined up. And that summer between my junior and senior year was actually the summer I was spending in Zambia working at this refugee camp. And um, it was a life-changing experience in the sense that I think I underestimated and what true poverty really looks like, and kind of the desperation and, um, it put so much of life in perspective for me, and continues to today. Um, I think I came out of that experience though really being daunted by uh, how how big the task was, how complicated and how difficult it is to work in international development. And that coincided with me coming back on campus in the fall of 2005, and a lot of my friends had gone on to do these like investment banking internships that summer, and had like a glorious time in New York City, and came back with $10,000 signing bonuses, which was, I mean, I had never kind of seen that kind of money in a bank account ever. And I was like really drawn to that. I think I was like drawn to the structure. I was drawn to I don't even want to say money. I think it was more like the allure and the sexiness of it. And also what felt like, okay, like that here's like a concrete path that kind of continues post university, whereas the field of international development felt so nebulous and unknowable, and it was like it wasn't even clear what the entry points would be. So I ended up, yes, getting a job at Bain and Company, for which I am forever grateful, because I think I was a liberal arts major. I studied what's called social studies. I mean, philosophy and economics, and I loved it, but just like had very little direct application to the world of business. And, I thought of my time at Bain. I spent 3 years there. I was a horrible first year analyst, and I think like a mediocre second year analyst. And then by my third year, I think I found my footing. But it just taught me so much. I mean, the skills, all the business skills that I have today, the kind of concrete, more analytical ones, I picked up during my time there.
Well, it's funny because I think a lot of folks from all colleges come out and they're not sure what to do. I remember, same thing. It's like, I have no idea. Here are some people recruiting for certain types of roles, which of course is just the narrowest of narrow things that people could choose to do, but it's the people who happen to show up. And yeah, but having that business education as a foundation from Bain must have been extremely valuable. It sounds like it was.
You're totally right, Paul. I mean, I'm kind of like, my father, when he graduated in 69, he was like, it was the JFK era of like, think not of what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And he's kind of, I think both, he's puzzled by how many people in my generation go into the private sector without and come kind of any regard for the potential possibility even of working in the public sector. And it's definitely both like a marketing and recruiting problem. I think as much as it is just like the power of the financial sector to kind of snatch up young talent. So
One of the things it is, and it didn't really, not necessarily right down this fairway for what we often talk about, but I think it's important for another really reason, and that is, you and I had a fascinating conversation when we were talking earlier about this intersection between mission and purpose and work and identity. And it feels like it's far away, but actually it's really fundamental in how people find a way to be able to get through and build companies successfully. And we were talking about Kipling's poem "If," and how it's very, very difficult, particularly given the incredible success you've had, and also the challenges you've had in one of the toughest, frankly, one of the toughest retail environments over the past 5 or 6 years that I think anybody is. I mean, we make a list of what happened. It's incredible. But maybe let's take a moment on that. And, because you're at Bain, you've done these extraordinary experiences. You decide to start your company and you have a lot of success early, like right out of the gate. It was hard, but you guys you found a place there very rapidly, I think, right?
I think maybe from the outside it felt that way. I think, when we really found traction as a business, I would say it was like late 2015, 2016. And at that point I had been working at it for about 5 years. And so, which like in the grand scheme of life is not a long time. And yet like in startup years, they're dog years. I was tutoring for the first 3 years, I think, basically, yeah, just to make ends meet and because I wasn't taking a salary. And so it was, a lot of long days of like, kind of wake up, start working, running around the garment district in New York City, and do that for 7, 8 hours. And then I would tutor usually from 3:30 to like 7 or whatever it was. And then I'd kind of get back to working. And that went on, yeah, for the first like 2 to 3 years. And it really, yes, I think when things started to click, it felt like this kind of like an explosion, really. But it was, I mean, I do remember people saying to me, like, well, if you don't find success by like this time, maybe you should like consider applying to business school, or just kind of, kind of slowly trying to like usher me to the exit. And I think that's just kind of you know who knows, that maybe that would have taken me on a very different and equally interesting path. But I do think so much of entrepreneurship is like, can you just like keep gnawing at it, even though it feels like you're not going anywhere at times. And sometimes you feel like you're actually going backwards.
Right. And in fact, you are going backwards. I mean, that's the irony is it can be meandering along. How did you during those times? And I wish I could say I can't empathize. I could totally empathize. And then, in fact, we had 5 years plus, more than once in our businesses over the years, where you're just like, this is not. There's a real question about how to proceed. But how did you maintain your ability to sort of keep going in that moment? And also in the context of how you're perceived, your peers are very accomplished. They're often on a platform where they're making, because they're part of another business and they're being able to really succeed and so on. And those are hard years where it feels like you're kind of going sideways. How did you approach that part of it beyond the tinkering and trying to get your business to work? Did you find any good tricks in managing that part of it? Because I would imagine that came in handy later too, as you guys went through some trickier times as well.
For sure. I think I like kind of, I've thought a lot about this question, because I even recently I struggle with it. Like it's like, to your point, like retail is harder than ever. The margins are so thin. Like we're like every year there's some sort of crisis, and what kind of keeps me going. I will say, I think without a doubt, like I would not be doing it if I didn't love it. And I really love it. And it is my life's passion and it's my life's work. Not to say that maybe there can't be other things in the future, but if I think about, okay, what is the mark that I want to make on the world? Uh, I, believe that the world is a better place when women succeed. And I I'm one of two girls. My parents, I think, always just kind of assumed that we would do whatever we wanted to do with our lives, and nothing was going to stop us from doing it, and very much raised us that way. And we were fortunate enough to like get the education that we did, and I went to an all-girls school, and I just, like, I don't know, for some reason, like, from the very beginning of my life, I am drawn to women. I so believe, I guess, in the power of women, and I think in as I get older and I see the discrepancies that emerge even in my generation, right? Like, I feel like my generation of women, especially, like, the ones I went to school with, like, we got everything the same as the boys, and yet somehow the boys are becoming more successful. Like, I see it playing out in real time. And it's just it moves me so much. It is my life's motivation to kind of level that playing field. And I would say I love clothing. Like, I love touching fabric. I love the transformative aspect of it. I love seeing customers put on a dress and look at themselves with a whole new perspective. Um, it's magical. I feel that in myself, like, every morning, I'm like, "Who do I wanna be today? What do I wanna channel today?" And, like, I just there are many ways, like, to contribute, I think, to the great cause that is women's empowerment, and by no means do I believe that clothing is, like, the most important way to do it. It just happens to be the thing I feel like I have something unique to say about it. So I feel like that's, like, first and foremost. I would say, like, the second thing is, like, I'm not, I I am, like, a pretty, like, gritty person. I think I can, like, stick things out for a long time, and that's probably, like, just naturally my personality, but I can keep going at things even if they are painful. And I was thinking about, okay, what is that? Like, okay, Asian mom, that probably has something to do with it. But I played piano growing up, and I do think that, like, lent a certain kind of discipline, which is like practicing is like for me it was not fun, but you just kind of have to, like, get yourself to the piano every single day, and you have to keep moving your fingers even though they don't move well. And, like, at some point, this, like, kind of natural magical thing happens, which is that your fingers start moving for you. Um, and it's not really like an intellectual process. You just kind of have to, like, be disciplined enough to just, like, put your butt in the seat and go at it. Um, and I think, I don't I never have reached, like, the level of, professional success, but I do think it's like a characteristic that's kind of allowed me to attempt other things with, like, equal amounts of, like, just get your butt in the seat and see what happens.
And that is, absolutely essential for entrepreneurship, right? Because, it is not up and to the right. It just, every once in a while it is. I mean, we actually probably in our circles, we know folks who that has been true for. And, but, actually most, at least our experience, certainly in my experience, there's a lot of, it not working and hanging in there. And I think so grit is no question. It's a critical part of it. And also enjoying it. I mean, I think what you're describing, the the purpose has to be there. And actually a fundamental component I've found again and again in businesses is if you get joy in helping your customers, that goes a long way because it's the engine of the business, but it's also really the essence of what makes good things happen. I remember with Ideally, we used to go to, ideally we sold like 2,000 brands, but we had these flash sales. We would do these short things. And I'd go to conferences and people are like, oh, the people working the desk looked great. And the people working the desk were wearing a dress that they felt good in. And you're right, it's a small thing, but they're like, you know what? I'm really Ideally it was great because I could afford this thing because normally I couldn't. And it gave them a mechanism to imagine themselves somewhere further on. And it's powerful. It's powerful stuff. And it is the foundation for all business, I think. I mean, all good business. I don't know. This is, you know. So okay, so you go through and it's so funny. You and I talked about this before, and I said the same thing last time. And you're like, and I'm like, you guys have had incredible success. And you're like, Paul, you forgot about this part. And people forget. People forget very quickly because there's a success bias. The story we want to think about is the story of success, right?
So interesting. I know, and I think to exactly to your point, like, I apply it to other people too. Actually, it's so funny because my girlfriend it's my college girlfriend, I was telling her about how I feel like a total failure and I can't, like, why can't I just, like, get this to, you know, whatever, I in my head, I have this number that I wanna get it to, and I'm like, I'm such an idiot, why can't I do this? And she put into ChatGPT, "Why does Sarah LaFleur feel like she's such a failure?" And she read it out to me, and I was like, "God, ChatGPT is really good." Um, really,
That's
really
hilarious.
and, yeah, I, like, talked about, like, okay, she works in a really difficult industry, challenges are ever never ending, and she's mentioned that in prior interviews. She's talked about her challenges with infertility and having to balance that with her work life, so that probably has contributed to it, and while she has never actually talked about it publicly, and, a lot of women well, women in many professional areas, um, feel that, they are, what's the word for it? I'm sorry. Like when you think you're something, but you're not, or,
Imposter syndrome.
yes, exactly. Women feel an imposter syndrome. She's not verbally said it, but she probably feels like a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I was like, gosh, nailed it.
Yeah,
You're
right.
totally right.
I'll show you. Look at that. We got all this, whatever. And we have things we're going to talk about, but I want to take a moment on this because it often doesn't happen and it's so valuable. So much of what it is to not only be an entrepreneur, but be an operator in growth stage business, which is a big part of our audience, right? These executives and others who listen. Um, basically there's nobody to talk to about this type of stuff. Really. I mean, you should try to find somebody. Hopefully you do. But what you're describing is really, really important to just remind everybody, which is this stuff is hard. And it has an impact on how you feel about yourself and what's going on in your life. And you take it home when you go home, kick the cat or whatever. And so, I think it's really, really important. And I'm grateful for you to sort of be open about talking about it because that's the other piece. Every day you got to figure out how to deliver. New stuff's coming over the transom. And in the meantime, you got to figure out how to be able to keep going and also lead, right? So that's the other piece to this, which is not only managing yourself, but figuring out, I've certainly found this, I'm sure you found this too, is everybody's looking at you, right? The whole team is like, should we keep bailing the boat? What are we doing here? And that is a lonely business, actually.
I find that being a CEO is kind of like, uh this is not gonna come out the right way, but, like, it's like an acting job. Like, uh, there's all this talk about, like, be your authentic self and, like, bring your true self to work, and, I subscribe to some of it, but, like, maybe half of it. And the truth is, like, if my team knew all the things that I was thinking about at 11:30 at night, they probably would not feel great about, um, showing up to work the next day. I think fear for me is both my, like, Achilles heel and a great motivator. But that as a leader, I do not like to, motivate people through fear. That is not how I like to lead. Um, I want to, lead people through genuinely motivating them and appreciating them and, of course, like, giving feedback when it's necessary, but it's and to me, to a certain extent, that is an acting job. Like, I want to I want to be known as the world's greatest CEO, and to me, that means, like, to a certain extent, I have to put on an act as what would the world's greatest CEO say at this moment? What rather than, like telling them what I think should be done, can I ask the right questions so that together we arrive at a better conclusion for how think things should be done? I'm by no means like, you know, the greatest CEO, but I think in my head, that is like the vision I concoct in my head for what that looks like and sounds like. And then I really I try to work towards that. So I think you're right. Like it's a different face that you kind of have to bring to work. I think to your point, like I remember once like I like slammed a door shut and I did it by accident. I did not even remember this incident. And then someone later on, there's a window actually said like, "Oh, we knew you were really upset that day because, because of how you like closed the window." And I was like, "Wow, everyone everyone in the entire office is watching how I close a window."
Yeah, everybody's always watching. Yeah. But I'd say one other thing that I've noticed and see whether or not this tracks for you, because this is a big idea, because I know this is true about you. I know virtually every really great leader I know, actually, it's not there's a melding, there's a truth in it. Like you're telling the truth. But I'd say something that I found to be true, and I'm going to use a nautical metaphor because I can't think of a better one. But if everybody is in the ship doing all of their roles, and you're in the wheelhouse and you're watching the waves come in, one of the things that happens, that I found to be true, is that our ability to be able to see something that, if you'd never seen it before, is terrifying. A huge swell coming over. You're like, I've seen these. I know what this is. It requires focus, and I got to pay attention. And it's a little scary because they're always scary. But the point is, my job is to figure out how to see all those things and be able to translate it for the company in such a way to tell them when they really have to worry. And the answer is, most of the time, even if they came up to the wheelhouse, it would scare the shit out of them. Most of the time, it's okay. It just looks scary because you just have to see a bunch of reps on it and it'll be all right. And so I think that's a big part of it, which is it's still scary in the moment as a CEO, but like, it's like, well, I don't know. This is the stuff that basically we have to deal with, and it's going to be okay. And we're going to let you know when you have to worry about the other parts. And that's our job. Our job is to find that spot. And I think holding those two ideas in your head, one is that it's scary viscerally and like, it's upsetting, and you wake up at 11 o'clock at night, or you write the notes at 3 a.m. like I do, or whatever. That can coexist with, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay, because they're both true. Does that make sense?
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. It makes 100% sense. I think now, I'm 12 years in. That's not true. 14 years in. So like I'm 12 years into the company, being founded, but 14 years in as an entrepreneur. Like, yeah, I mean, I think I thought we were going to, I can, like every year, I think there's at least one incident that I think will take us under, and it doesn't. um, uh, and so that I think has taught me a lot about what, surviving looks like and feels like. And yes, it also, you're right. Now I think I have enough confidence to turn to my team and say, yeah, I get it. It's a crisis. We need to work on it, but it is not the end of it is not the end of the business. It is not the end of the world. But I think going back to your point about, or like what I do tell myself is like, I think my natural inclination is to end up facing every crisis as though it were the end of the business. Like, it's not great, actually. It's not great for my mental health, and it's something that I'm working on. I really want to work on. But I think often the way I find myself pulling me and the team out of these crises is by positioning it as though it could be the end. I don't know. Does that make sense?
100%. The way I used to say it was, there's like 3 times a year where the CEO has to be perfect, and the rest of it's table stakes. And it's those moments, right, where it's like, I don't know, I have to be able to figure out how to get us from A to B. And 98% is not good enough, and you just have to, the round has to get raised, The deal has to get done, the whatever, right? And if you don't, then, things slip off into the distance, and that's the end of it. And if you do, then what's incredible, and you know this again, because you've got a lot of friends who've done this, and I certainly have seen this too, is it's shocking how often, if you really dig into the most successful companies you've ever heard of, how many times that it came down to a moment and they were going down. I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who's, sold his company with a B in it. Okay. And they were like, they're like 2.5 weeks away from going completely, you know, out of cash, have to fire everybody. It's all over. The investors are like, basically people are picking out what share and what box they're going to take their stuff home with. And, they figure out this thing and they figured out a deal at the last possible moment that would lead them to do this thing and then that thing. And then, and then they were on a chain and it was a great success. But man, oh man, it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yes, and I honestly don't think it's healthy. I think that's I don't, I think that this is the part where I'm like, I don't I wish I knew another way to do it. I wish and I'm sure there's there are a lot of gurus out there who know a better way. I think the habits that I have gone into is that, it is kind of the, motivation out of fear. I and like I think I have it is an unhealthy kind of relationship with work. Um I kind of look at other entrepreneurs. What's the British Richard? And he seems to like bring so much joy. Who knows what he's like behind the scenes or what's actually going on in his head? I have no idea. But I think I don't know. That's something that's kind of what I have. I'm 41 right now. It is like I've kind of given myself the next year to really say, like, is there a different way to orient myself so that fear is not the constant motivation for success?
Yeah. Well, and also, companies arrive at a point. First of all, Richard, I don't know Richard Branson, so what do I know? But I think part of it is that's the brand. Like he is the brand ambassador, and I think he's got the ability to be able to, have operators who are running underneath. They're probably losing a lot of sleep. But I also think that part of it is that companies go through that moment where they have to come through those hard times. And actually, I think is definitely going to be true in your business, and commerce and retail in general is, there are tough times. You are one of the companies that have found their way through. And as we all know, many, many have not. And so let's take a moment on that, because actually I think, I think you said it last time we talked, it's like a black swan a year. It's a lot of black swans. Uh, and including, COVID, and then this run up, and then, and you guys are in workwear, and then having to deal with the fundamentally like a extraordinary change in the private capital markets. Talk a little bit about how you found your way through, because you did, and many didn't.
We did. Yeah, I would say COVID was probably, of all the things that threatened our business, the biggest one. It was, we were a business whose customers mainly went to the office Monday through Friday, and overnight they stopped going. And our revenue, I think February 2020 was actually one of the strongest months we'd ever had as a business. And just to kind of put things into perspective, our 2020 sales ended up being more than 50% down to 2019. We went through 3 rounds of layoffs. We closed every single one of our stores. There was a period where we thought we were going to have to stop shipping from our e-com site as well, because, everyone thought, like, actually, is COVID transmitted through surfaces, so it was It was horrible. It was horrible. And, you know, through got lots of creative, I think, ideas. We ended up, renaming one of our best-selling pants. They were called the, Origami Tech, uh, um, pleated trousers. I think we called them, uh, uh, waistband joggers. It was just like we same product, different name, and kind of repositioned as much as we could for this time where all of our customers were suddenly at home. And it was like really thanks to her. I actually just like met a customer. I was in our one of our New York City stores on Monday, and I met someone and she was like, "Oh, I've been shopping with you since pre-COVID." And she was wearing actually a dress that we had released spring of 2020. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is the lost season, the lost collection. Like I can't believe you own this dress." And she was like, "Yeah, I know. I like realized it was like I really wanted to support you guys during COVID because I was so scared that you were gonna go under." And I don't know, it's just, like, so funny to hear that, and but it's true, it's, like, these amazing loyal customers that we have, like, they literally single-handedly, like, m made sure we survived COVID. Um, and I mean, even 2021 was pretty bleak. It really wasn't until 2022 when I think people were it wasn't even just about going back to the office because we, our merchandise is much broader than that, and, I wear my stuff on the weekends now too, but it's like people needed to be in the mindset to, like, go out again and be seen again and feel put together again, and so the business really came back in 2022, but, it was 2 years of just kind of, like, not knowing if we were gonna make it, and we thought we were gonna have to do a fire sale and actually had, like, several conversations with buyers who were like, "I don't know about this, like, it might have to just, like, be an asset sale." Like, it was pretty bleak. And I think so to have come through that period, um, is yeah, a relief.
What do you think the playbook was? I mean, if you had to look back and you had to three-step it, what did because beyond the panic, right, which I had as well, right, and we all had. I mean, what do you think you did that allowed you guys to find your way through that? A lot of hard decisions and so on, obviously, but how would you?
Yeah, and if I had to do this again, and I mean, we have had to some extent in the recent tariffs, which have been a real another kind of black swan crisis event for us too. But um, I think the first thing is that, like, it has to come back to like I don't need to talk business people through a P&L, but like it is kind of just about the P&L, and it's like, are your customers like, okay, revenue, like, do your customers still want your product? If not, why? And like, what can you change to make sure that they will continue to buy your product, right? And so like that's like kind of step one, and that's my example with the jogger is like the product itself was not the problem. It's just that we were marketing it in a way that made it completely unappealing to the time we were living in. And so I think that's kind of step one. Step two, what it makes it sound like it should come afterwards, is probably the first thing you need to do is just like significant cost restructuring. Like, I think I honestly I didn't cut deep enough, and then hence 3 rounds. I mean, I think nobody thought, remember when we said, "Oh, well, we'll see you in 2 weeks," and then 2 weeks became 3 months, and then 3 months became a year and a half. Like, COVID lasted so much longer than any of us ever would have thought of, but I think that really kind of, hindsight's 2020. I wish I had cut deeper faster. Um, and then I would say, like, third is like I mean, it's the third and most important is the team. Like, the team that got me through that period, many of whom are still with me today, is like, I don't know why they didn't leave for a different job, ideally in tech. Like, tech was booming at the time. Like, it, and yet they somehow chose to stay with this business that was in retail that was 50%, more than 50% down to prior year. But like, they believed. And those people still, like, many of them who were there during this period are now my like kind of strongest directors, and like they are battle tested. Like if COVID didn't scare them, like the tariffs, like whatever, you know? Um, that's why like even in the hiring process, like I actually love hiring people who have stayed with companies during downturns. Like if I see like Google and Facebook and like just like illustrious company after another, I don't usually those are not my top hires. Because I think you just learn more during the hardest times.
Yeah, totally. By the way, that's about as good of a three-step playbook as I've ever heard on this, which is product and customer. Cut deep fast, go further, right? By the way, I don't know, whatever. I've been doing this about 1 billion years. I still don't do that well. It's really hard to do well. And, but it's, actually, it's interesting. It's the Sequoia playbook. They come up with I'm sure you've seen their manifestos, and whenever things get weird, I'll send them to you.
Yeah, please do. I wanna read it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, and those guys, they're smart guys, it's pretty ruthless. But what's important about it, and people often have that, like, that's too much. It's like, no, that's how you save the company, because otherwise it goes down. And so I think there's there are a lot of different types of people who run businesses. I think you and I are both empaths, probably more, than most. And this is one of the hardest things, because you're like, but I've done it wrong and had companies go out of business, which is grim, right? Because then you're like, you had to fire them all bit by bit, and then you had to shut it down. It's like, that's worse. And if we had done it faster, it would have been different for sure. But that, I'll tell you, that's the other piece that you demonstrated in this, which I think is extremely rare, in fact, which is understanding how to deliver a great product, scaling, and the growth culture you build around that, and then having to tear it down and redo. Actually, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And a lot of operators never pull it off. So, but what you just described is a really good playbook for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I I think this is where numbers don't lie, and you're totally right. Like I am like a I've got a big empath, lots of feelings, but it's where the PNL is like the only source of truth, and you're like, okay, my head count needs to be X, and then like if you're not getting to X, well, you still haven't cut deep enough, you know. And even that PNL sometimes is just like even your assumptions there are not correct, but I appreciate your saying that.
The other thing that's important about that is that ultimately that may be, um, it's interesting. It's the lesson that people who start a dry cleaner or some other, like my joke always with, at this point in my career, I just want to be called a business owner, because I feel like if people call me an entrepreneur, it's a little too glamorous. But the business owners all know this. So like, I don't know. If it's a negative number, then I'm not, the kids, no bikes for the kids this Christmas, like whatever. Like it's because it's directly out. And I think one of the challenges with investors is that you can get fuzzy thinking in there, because you can say, look, we're going to go into a deficit situation to be able to set up conditions for scale. Talk a little bit about, you have investors, and you've done this across this. How did that play out for you? Did you find that they, of course you got money, you were able to scale, but then the capital markets in general had dried up. And I presume that you found that did you guys go out and look for a round in the midst of all of that, or did you just hunker down?
So I have VC investors, and I think I mentioned that because I honestly have like the most supportive investors a founder could ever ask for. And I mean that in the emotional sense, because I think financially, like I've been at this for so long, and COVID was this like huge,
Yeah, right.
it basically like took 3 to 4 years, I think, out of our timeline. And so while they have not explicitly said this to me, I'm kind of assuming they have all written us off. Um, and yet they continue to be emotionally so supportive. And I realize how I did not realize how rare that is. And now I have a lot of friends who also run companies, and I know how rare that is. And so I guess that's just like kind of one general lesson is this is like a lot of these investors I've now, had relationships with them longer than like most things I've done in life, right? Like it really matters who is on your cap table and who's around your board. And so grateful for that. But like financially, they can't put more money into the business. Like that's not how their model works either. And so I've had to seek other sources. And we had this incident last year where our primary lender was going out of business and went out of business. And it was the scariest 3 months. I thought COVID was scary, but this actually was scarier because it happened so fast and so acutely. And it was really only happening to a small number of companies because it was a relatively small lender. And basically, to make a long story short, I had to go raise $3 million within 2 weeks. And I knew I was never going to be able to get that kind of money through institutional investors. And so it ended up, we ended up raising that money from a lot of our existing customers and who are massive fans. And also some, I would say, like, friends of the brand, because we've got some men on that list as well, very supportive men. And it was, I think I've always wanted to be like a woman founded, woman run business, but I never quite been able to be a woman owned business. If I just look at the cap table again, our investors, most of whom are male, still own the majority of the business. And it was, we're now getting to that point where we're almost at parity, just as a result of being able to bring on female investors. I'm really proud of that. And I think I would love for, that I would love for MM to be obviously a success, but ideally a financial success that could return, capital to those female investors who really did take a chance on us. I mean, I even see it in the fundraising world. Like men just have a lot more money than women do. It's just like it's like so plain to see when you're fundraising. But I think that's a narrative that I hopefully can also not rewrite, but maybe like push, gently nudge in that direction.
Through all of this and all the challenges, you got to profitability and you got your revenue back up, which is extraordinary given what you've described. So, and that was that discipline. And here you are. So, and that was actually, you got profitability, I think, last year or the year before. I mean, you guys have run
We got, 2022, 2022. And then, yes, it's, I will say there have been some years since then where it was like just break even or, but yes, basically 2022 was really the year we got to that point.
And then you managed to continue to, well, and now you've had a few years in a row. And now some new things, some interesting things, the Bento box. Maybe talk a bit about the Bento box. I thought that was a really interesting idea. And has that been, maybe you could describe what that is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've always, and I think about my customer, she's not your fashion girl who's like poring over the pages of Vogue and, going to thrift shops to curate her like most unique look. Like she's a busy professional woman. Maybe she doesn't even work outside the home, but like she does not have time. Like time is a luxury for her, and she wants to look great. She wants to look stylish and put together. But like if someone else were able to tell her like, buy these three items, like this will look great on you, then she would be happy to take that recommendation. And that is really what Bento is about. E-commerce shopping, I think for many reasons is broken. And like one of the reasons is because, brands like mine will make hundreds and hundreds of styles. And if you go onto a website, you have to comb through it to figure out which one works best for you. Bento is really my answer to that. And it's what I use and wish I had prior to starting MM. You complete a brief survey online, and based on that, a stylist actually puts together a lookbook of recommendations for you. And it is really what kind of set us apart when we first started the business. We launched in end of 2014, and then just like the scale that we drove as a business came out of Bento. It was like our primary customer acquisition channel. We had to shut it down right before COVID because of just how unprofitable it was. It was, and I think it was unprofitable because of just like what a strain it was on our inventory. In order to sell one item, we had to carry 8 of those, just because the in and out of the inventory and how long a customer would hold on to an item like made it incredibly complicated. But I always believed in it as a model, and so I wanted to always relaunch it in a different format. And because of COVID, we weren't able to do that until just actually a year ago. But we did relaunch it in 2024, and it's been an amazing success. Out the door. I think we had some proof points, but it's nice to see it prove out again. And this time profitably. It's great to be able to get a second chance at something that you believe so much in.
Yeah.
Taking with it a lot of the business lessons that we learned the first time around.
One of the things that's extraordinary to me, and because of Ideally, we ended up spending a lot of time with executives at some of the biggest brands, the most successful brands in the world. And one of the things that always struck me, and I can see this in the context of what you're describing here too, is that the folks who, the big luxury brands in particular, the certainly the people on the creative side, but actually, at the executive level, it's about a brand, and it's about what you're describing, this ethos, this connection, this, desire for aesthetic perfection, and then trying to meld that to a customer and so on. Like this is just very, very, which by the way, P&L is not, nobody's, I go to these meetings and I'd be like, and they'd be like, and we'd have our questions because we're trying to figure out how to, and they're like, I have no idea. I don't know. Our margins are like 1,000,000,000%.
I envy that, Paul. One day, I too.
Right. One day, I too.
$1 billion margin.
Right. Exactly. But what's important, which I just want to call out because I've seen this both ways. And the other end within Ideally was that we hired Ross and TGX buyers, and they are not on the same planet, right? I mean, they just, by the way, brilliant. These folks were incredibly good, and because they could combine what's of the moment, what's going to sell, work the deal, understand the margin, like the sell through. I mean, the margins that they were running at, they have to be perfect, right? And so it's a completely different thing. But what I find extraordinary about what you just described, which is really exciting and a really, to me, gives me a lot of, a lot of optimism for about what you're about to do, is you're combining those two things together. And it's the hardest thing to do because it's two different worlds. And I was looking at the site, and I was, my wife, who's, CEO, who always looks put together, but, never, she doesn't have any time for this at all. And, she's like what you're describing here, which is being able to bring, fashion at a price point that people can feel good about what they're wearing, work in any room. And, frankly, coming from me, it probably doesn't matter much, but I know this to be true. Nobody really looks at what the men are wearing. And that's bullshit. I'm just going to call it out, but it's true. And unfortunately, oddly, I mean, it's still so being able to show up and be like, you know what? All right, you did your thing. That's what that box checks. Now let's get down to business and figure out how we're going to work together. Like that's a gift.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's so funny to hear you say, like, yes, the two worlds are totally different, right? Like the TJ Maxx planner buyer and the luxury goods people. And I think what makes fashion as an industry, like, God, it is such a terrible, horrible, like, industry in so many ways but, like, God, I love it so much, and I think the reason I love it so much is because of that, like, art and science. Like, to me, fashion is, like, the most interesting business.
And it's the hardest one. Basically, I will tell you, if and this is it's funny because we saw this again and again, is you go through all the different, but I mean, every business is hard. Frankly, everybody we talk to, like, man, it's hard to make a living, and build things. But this business, and you got to reinvent it every season, for God's sake. It's nuts. So, but the fact that all the pieces have come together and you managed to get through this part is really exciting. And I want to end with this. These things require a lot of ourselves to build them. And you know what? You don't even have to be just a founder for that. Like if you're running, you're running $100 million business and you're in charge of marketing or you're in charge of, finance or whatever, this stuff matters because if the thing goes down, then people got to go find a new job and they have mortgages and got to figure out, and customers don't get what they need. I mean, like it doesn't, it's not existential, that we're not talking about, there's a million other complicated things in the world, but like it's real deal stuff. And, I don't know. I'm very inspired by what you described today. So thank you for taking the time.
Appreciate that so much, Paul. I know you've seen, like, not only have you lived the entrepreneurship experience, like, I know you advise a lot of CEOs and founders, and yeah, to be able to have this conversation with you is it means a lot to me. It is a true privilege. Thank you.
Now,